Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Deidre Harmon, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight for our last and final Pastureland Ecology webinar series. Tonight, this webinar series is intended to give participants an understanding of the principles underlying the pasture ecosystem and kind of how the manager can interact productively within the entire system. The faculty of the Amazing Grazing present an annual national training program for the NRCS, and these presentations are really a training or a basis for that training and that overall program. So look for hands-on Amazing Grazing workshops across North Carolina in 2023, which we are currently working on getting dates for at the moment. So with that, tonight we've got three really great speakers. The first one is going to be Johnny Rogers. He's going to talk to us about the power of one wire and the fundamentals of electric fence. Johnny Rogers is the educational coordinator of the Amazing Grazing program and the director of the North Carolina Beef Cattle Improvement Program, where he provides leadership for the North Carolina Bull Test program. Johnny has organized many research projects and educational events for Amazing Grazing. Johnny manages Rogers Cattle Company with his wife Sharon, where they raise Red Angus cattle and Katahdin sheep. Johnny and Sharon graze several solar farms within the area with their sheep flock, and Johnny is a national leader in the Red Angus breed, and he's internationally known for his educational work with sheep producers grazing solar farms. So with that, Johnny, I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to tell us tonight.
Okay, thanks, Deidre. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good, and I can see your presentation.
Great, good deal. Well, welcome everyone to our final webinar this evening, and excited to bring some information to you about the power of one wire. And we like to call it, this presentation, a broader view of adaptive grazing. And first, we probably need to just talk a little bit about what is adaptive grazing. I know that's something the Amazing Grazing team likes to focus on. And if you look at some of these key components of adaptive grazing, you're probably sitting there thinking, well, that's a lot like management intensive grazing or rational grazing or mob grazing or a lot of other grazing techniques you might run into. And that's true. I think the big thing that we like to emphasize with adaptive grazing is the planning part. This is something that you have to think about. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, the observations and monitoring, and then changing and adjusting as you go along the way. We like to avoid, something that's a prescription where you just do it this way all the time and everything will be okay, because we think it's a lot more complicated than that, and farms are unique, and we all know that grazing systems are unique. So we need to make sure that we stay adaptive, stay nimble, be ready to move as changes come our way. So I always like to use this quote from Jim Garrish because I think it just really sets the stage for a lot of things we do in grazing. And Jim says this is when you buy, or in my case and Sharon's case, we lease a lot of farmland, and some of y'all do probably as well. So when you have an acre of land managed, let's just call it manage an acre of land, you've got that 43,560 square feet of solar panel. Of course, there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. And what Jim's saying here is he's not talking about the solar farms that we graze with our sheep. He's talking about the leaf and the process of photosynthesis, and the building of plant tissue with carbon dioxide and sunlight, and all that process that happens in plant leaves. So it kind of goes back to what I hear a lot of grazers say is, it takes grass to grow grass, and you have to protect that leaf area so we can grow more grass, after a grazing period. And of course, through this webinar series, we've learned a lot about the soil, and we know that we can be very good at capturing rainfall and solar energy with our management, or we can do a very poor job. And, there's instances of that. And certainly we need to think about soil health and water infiltration and the physical properties of soil structure as we start managing our grazing systems. So Steve did a great job, Steve Woodruff, last time talking about the principles of soil health, and I just kind of included them here. Not going to spend a lot of time on those, but just to remind you that, good pastures, start from the ground up. We have to be cognizant and aware of what's going on in the soil as we continue to improve our grazing systems. Anytime I get a chance with a grazing presentation, I always put a slide in about extending the grazing season, whether that's with stockpile forages or annual forages. But I really, really like stockpiling perennial forages like tall fescue. And of course, you can stockpile any type of forage, but fescue just does such a great job stockpiling through the fall for winter grazing. And one of the things I like to emphasize there is you look at the benefits there. One of those is a rested plant. So that plant gets to rest. And we know that when a plant rests and when we don't take off all of the leaf material, that plant's going to be able to develop and maintain a more vibrant, deeper, more substantial root system, can develop in those plants. So here in this particular demonstration, you can see that these different plants, this is actually, I think, Bahia grass. And it was cut to 2 inches every week or cut to 2 inches every 4 weeks. So it's the same intensity of grazing down to 2 inches, which would be appropriate for warm season grass. But the frequency is what's changed. So how often do you come back? And we've learned so far that, it's really about that maintaining that solar panel above the ground, that leaf area, that will allow a plant to maintain that root system underneath it. So when you look at the 3 plants you have here on the screen, certainly that one on the far right, I would want that root system, in my plants out in my pasture as I go into, the summertime, looking for rainfall, and intermittent rainfall at that. So enough said about that. So when we think about adaptive grazing, we're going to have some tools, because again, we need to be flexible. There's going to be times when we may want to take a 10-acre pasture and divide it in half, maybe make 2 5-acre pastures, and maybe we'll want to divide it up in 10 different ways in 1 acre increments, might be more appropriate then. And don't get overwhelmed, to start with. You can say, wow, I don't know, when would I do this? When would I do that? Don't worry about that, at this point. Just realize that you will kind of develop this as you go along. And there's some steps to amazing grazing that we'll talk about a little bit later, and all this will kind of start to come together. But you may need some temporary electric fence. You may need a way to haul it around. You might even need some temporary or permanent water systems. But the thing that you really have to grapple with to get started is you have to, always like to say, manage that 1 square foot that's between your ears. You have to change the way you think, and probably more deeply than that, you need to change the way you see things out in your pastures. Can go a long way to helping us build better grazing systems. So one of the things I needed to talk about tonight was electric fences, or power fence systems, sometimes they're called, because that all this temporary fence, it is a psychological barrier to our livestock. So it's not physical, but so most all of it would be energized in some way. So we need to know a little bit about electric fencing, and that's what I'm going to give you tonight. There are 3 components of electric fence. There's an energizer, the fence itself, the wire, whether it's permanent or temporary, like polywire, and then the grounding system becomes very, very critical. And all of these have to be, correct for the fence to operate and contain our livestock and help us manage them and do what we're supposed to do. So just in case you didn't know, how does the electric fence work? And again, this will be very brief, and we can certainly hit some questions if we need to. You have an energizer there. Probably there's solar powered units, and certainly there's probably the most popular ones are, plug into the main power source, 110 volts. So, and it's connected to your fence. And what that energizer does is it sends an impulse. It's not, a constant source of energy or or of electricity, but it's a pulse, you know, and it's every few milliseconds. They're very close together. So it's moving this power down the electric fence, and then the animal touches it. Well, then the energy, the electricity will flow through the animal and actually goes through the earth, through the ground, and then it goes back to these ground rods that are also attached to the Energizer. The circuit is complete and the shock is delivered. Well, obviously that happens really fast. And, you know, I always like to make the point that, you know, if you're suspended in the air, you know, the electric fence doesn't shock you. That's why you might see birds sitting on your electric fence at some time, because they're not touching the ground and the circuit can't be complete. So again, that's kind of just basically how an electric fence works. And again, going back to those three components, grounding is, as we troubleshoot electric fencing, we can find faults with all three of these. Grounding in a lot of cases is the weak link. So just a few more basic tips about electric fence. You know, how are you going to energize it? What type of energizer are you going to have? You know, one that, you know, plugs into your main source of power, a solar portable unit. Maybe that's, and most all solar units are actually battery powered, that actually are just recharging the battery by solar. So you just need to think about which one of those are most appropriate for you in your situation. Usually you can get more power, more energizer for the price, with the ones that, you know, plug into the main energy source. But solar units do offer you some flexibility, and, you know, in some cases you may not have, you know, electrical power out in your grazing systems. Animals need to be trained, you know, to electric fence. If they've never seen electric fence, there is a process there. And again, we can talk through that if there's questions. Under normal conditions with limited vegetation on the fence, you know, if you put a fence tester on your electric fence, you get 5,000 kilovolts or 5,000 volts for cattle. That would be adequate. And probably I would even say, you know, for trained cattle, you might even go down to 3, but really you kind of like for it to stay to 5. And that way, when you get 5 is your rule of thumb. And that way, when you get some vegetation on it, it may be down to 3 and it'll still contain your cattle. Sheep and goats needs to be a little more substantial, maybe 7,000 volts. Wet conditions, again, can offer some challenges there. When you start adding a lot of poly products to your existing electric fence, you will find that poly products have a lot of resistance and it will start to drain the power on your Energizer. So take home message here is pretty simple. You know, if you had an Energizer that was working great before you started adding Polywire, then you may need to have a larger Energizer, you know, to deliver the shocking power that you need. Make sure you monitor the voltage on your electric fence. And a good rule of thumb as far as the size of the Energizer, most Energizers are categorized in terms of joules of output. You know, and joule is a measure of energy. So for 10 to 40 acres of you know, grazing systems, we like to think about 1 joule of output. So if you've got a, you know, 100-acre farm, you know, you might need a 2 to 3, you know, maybe even a 4 joule unit, depending on how much poly products you might have. And then the ground rods, you know, most Energizers need at least 3 ground rods. As you get into some larger Energizers, I know the one we have on our farm, it's got 11 ground rods. So it can get, you know, quite sticky there. And there is a process we can kind of take you through to see if you got adequate grounding for your electric fence system. I wanted to throw out a little bit about Polywire, or excuse me, Polynet, because it's not always just about, you know, the power of one wire. Sometimes one wire becomes one section of netting when we're talking about small ruminants or maybe pasture poultry or pasture pork. So I did want to throw that out just so we can talk about it. Dr. Weaver may mention it a little bit more as he talks about small ruminants. ElectroNet from Premier 93512 is a good all-around, you know, fence for small ruminants. And there's various lengths and sizes and post spacings and options and lots of different things that we can talk about if you have questions. And this can be a very frustrating product to use, I'll just say up front, but it can keep you in the small ruminant business because it offers control of your animals and it offers predator protections, ground predator protections. So I know everybody's thinking about, okay, so what's this power of one wire that we're talking about? What's the big deal? And again, for small ruminants, might be one section of netting. Well, here's a pasture, and you can see down here at the bottom center of the screen, that is a water source there. And this actually is high tensile fence that's going around this pasture, and really doesn't matter if this pasture is 1 acre or 50 acres. It really wouldn't matter. It is about a 25-acre pasture, though. This is actually on our farm. So what we might do is take a temporary fiberglass fence post, drive it in the ground pretty close to our water source, and then take some polywire and step-in post, or again, if you're small ruminants, we're going to run us a set of netting across through here, and then we're going to connect it to our fence, and it would get power, to our polywire that way. And then in our case, we're going to bring in our cows. And they've got shade. They've got, you can see they can access the water source there. We're going to bring in a free choice mineral feeder. So they've got grass, they got mineral, they got water, and they got shade. So they've got everything they need. So they graze that grass down to the appropriate height. And then, eventually your cattle will start to figure out that, hey, when this guy shows up, good things happen, and so we roll up our temporary fence there a little bit with one of our polywire reels. And our cattle say, hey, it doesn't take a lot of training, no cowboys, no herding dogs, anything like that. They get the picture pretty quick. There's better grass on that side of the fence than where they were. And so now you can see we changed the placement a little bit of our polywire and moved our mineral feeder. And so what did we just do there with this little exercise just by cutting this pasture in half? Well, if you truly cut it in half, you doubled your stock density. And we've not talked a lot about that, but that is a good thing. We have talked a lot about increasing rest periods. So it's pretty clear to see your cattle grazing on one side, the other side's resting and growing and developing, more plant tissue, more roots, so forth, so on. Good thing, good thing. What else happened here? You learned how to use temporary electric fence, and that's a good thing. Maybe not something you were familiar with. And again, not a very intensive deal. We've not talked about moving cattle once a day or anything. This could be depending on the size of the field, size of your operation, that may be moving that once a week or something like that. So not very intimidating at all. And you have trained your cattle in this case, or you've trained your livestock to use temporary electric fence and to respect it. And, again, you trained them, during this deal. And again, when they go and interact with that fence, you want it to be that lifetime changing experience for them. So you need to have a good shock, make sure we got adequate power on there where they learn that, hey, we don't go around that polywire, or we don't go around that poly net with small ruminants. So again, this is cattle focused, but it could be about small ruminants or even equine as far as that goes. I know Dr. S is going to talk about that in just a bit. But I think using the things that it's just not about grazing management, the power of one wire, it's all the other things that come along with it and all the other things that happen once you start using this management technique, because, cattle can't tell you what's wrong with them. But when you start taking up this wire, and I would be over here to the right-hand side of the screen rolling up this wire, or my wife probably would, and I was taking pictures of it. And we're rolling that up, and those cows are just coming out of those woods, and they can't tell us what's wrong. But the ones that are moving slow, the ones that maybe have a limp or something, we could see immediately what that is, as opposed to if we weren't moving the cattle, they would just lay there and continue to lay around until we made them go get up. So we're giving them a reason to get up and kind of show us how they're doing, kind of a little health and wellness check, if you will, for our herd. We can count them as they go by. We can do a body condition score. We can look at their gut feel again, like we talked last time, on the left side where the rumen is, feet, legs, and udders. On cows, we can look at that. We can look at the cow that's raising a really good calf. We can see the cow that's raising a calf that's not so good. Maybe write her number down. If a cow walks by you and kicks at you or something, you can write her number down too. So I'm not going to put up with that. And the calves, scours, during times of the year that can be a problem. Looking at their eyes, the fly count during the summertime, it just kind of makes us a better manager. And we think in North Carolina, that just follows right along with beef quality assurance. What we encourage beef producers to do, this just fits right in with that and actually enhances their ability to kind of fulfill their commitment to produce quality beef. We use a lot of temporary fence for temporary lanes to cut up, larger fields. This was a particular case where we had cattle going back and forth to shade during a relatively dry period. You can see it's kind of dry out in the summer. This was actually our herd of cows. So we were able to get more rest on the grass after we grazed it. So it was very critical. Something else that people just really can't believe is once cattle are trained to temporary electric fence, you can do a lot of really cool things, and you can use it to sort cattle out of a herd here. You can see this would be a group of cattle out here in the pasture, and you need to cut out one cow because maybe it's got a sore foot or it's got some pink eye. And again, this yellow arrow up there kind of shows you that's where we're going. So our alternative here is to bring all the cattle in, cut out the one we need, treat it, and then send them all back out into this pasture. Well, if we do that, that's going to, even using low stress handling techniques, that is going to disrupt that herd a little bit, because when they're walking and getting herded, they're not going to be eating, or ruminating and relaxing. So what we can do is you can get your, someone to help you. In my case, it's about always my wife. I'm on one end of the polywire, she's on the other, and we just kind of start cutting that cow out, moving her toward the gate. And, we just ease her right over there. One of us opens the gate, we treat her, and everything is done, and introduce her back into the herd. The rest of the herd, they stay doing what they're doing, eating grass and growing and being productive. So you say, well, that's really interesting on PowerPoint, but does it really happen in real life? Yes. This is a picture of my wife that she's, telling me to put the camera down, or put the phone down so we can get these cows moved and move on. So that's kind of what it looks like. We don't just use it on our place. Dr. Poor and his nephew are using it here to cut out one of their pasture finished beeves, that needs some treatment. And folks really don't understand, and I really don't understand either at times, why this works so well in close quarters in a corral. I know this is Dr. Poor and his nephew, and it would take several people to get those cattle to walk into that gate there, into the smaller catch pen that they have up there. So, but you put that polywire up and the cattle just kind of line up and go in there saying, oh, okay, they've got the wire out, we better go. So again, it's the things that happen after you just started cutting that pasture in half and using polywire that kind of makes it pretty special, I think. The other thing it does is it allows you to protect some sensitive areas. This is another field on our farm, and you can see limited shade in this area. So we're trying to, use some polywire, some semi-permanent polywire to maybe protect some of those shaded areas to prevent cattle from going to the same shade area every time, creating a mudded out area that's not very good for the cattle or for the trees or the soil or anything else. So try to give those areas some rest. And sure, there's some forbs that grow back in there that a lot of people would call weeds, but hey, it's a living root. It's keeping the soil covered. We're building some diversity there as well. So we're building soil health, and there you go. So how do you learn how to use this temporary fence? Well, probably the first step is just to get some and try it out yourself. But there's certainly some amazing grazing workshops where we talk about it a whole lot. And there's probably producers close to you that are using it. And usually grazers are very, very generous with their time and willing to help you kind of learn and figure some things out. So again, here's this same group of cows again. So again, just to summarize, what's the power of one wire? Better forage production is only the beginning, of using this management style, this adaptive grazing style. Better observation equals better management for your livestock. It kind of keeps you in touch with pasture ecology. It allows you to spend time with your family members, maybe your spouse, your kids, your grandkids. I know Mike Jones and his wife do a lot of grazing as a family, and they really enjoy their times up with their grandkids up at their farm in Surrey County. And again, there's a margin of safety there. The alternative to this would be a tractor and bringing out hay maybe during the winter, as opposed to strip grazing stockpile grass with temporary electric fence. So again, I think that's something there we can't really overlook either. Improved livestock handling, again, being able to sort those cattle out is something that's very, very nice once you have cattle trained to polywire. Protecting those hotspot areas and shade trees, making sure we maintain that. And the other thing is when we have storm damage, and we all do, after a big major storm, it gives you a little bit of time. You can run a polywire around that tree that's down over your main fence. The cattle will, kind of respect that for a little while until you can get the main fence fixed. So really, Power One Wire, it is the key to adaptive grazing management, I think, and it's certainly something we support and we encourage you to try and use, and would certainly be willing to help you in any way possible. And I think that covers it. Deidre, I will turn her back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Johnny. What a good presentation that was. And as you can see, every night that we've done this, and kind of every presentation kind of builds on each other. And Johnny really set the stage for tonight, talking about the power of one wire and how we have all these tools and technologies that we can use to help us be better managers of the land, better managers of the forage resources, and help us take care of our natural resources like the soil and the trees and the diversity that we have, no matter what species that we're grazing, whether it's horses, whether it's sheep, goats, cattle, whatever species you may have. So our next speaker tonight, and I will say that we're going to save all the questions to the end of the night, and we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the night after we do get through all the presentations.